The three riders came at dusk, when the desert turned the color of rust and old blood. They rode slow, the way men ride when they own what they're looking at. But when they crested the last rise and saw who stood in the yard beside the widow, they stopped. Every one of them. 3 weeks earlier, Martha Hale had nothing left but the land itself. The land, and whatever courage a woman scrapes together when the world decides she's finished. Out on the Arizona frontier in the year 1898, there was a saying among the settlers: "The West doesn't care who you are, only what you're willing to stand for." Martha was still deciding what that meant for her. She wouldn't have to wait long. The Hale Ranch sat 7 miles southeast of Red Mesa, where the high desert plateaued and the scrub cedar thinned to nothing. From the porch, you could see 40 miles in 3 directions, a wide, baking silence that swallowed sound and patience equally. The ranch house was sound timber and adobe, built with care, but the land around it looked spent. The creek bed that crossed the eastern pasture had run dry 2 summers ago. The cattle were sold off season by season. Most neighbors had already written the place off. Martha had been a widow for 14 months. Her husband, Daniel Hale, had worked this parcel for 11 years before a fever took him in the spring of 1897. He died believing the land had a future. Martha believed it too, though she couldn't have said exactly why. Stubbornness, maybe, or something quieter. A faith in the ground itself, in what it held beneath the dry crust. She was 31 years old, slim and sun-browned. With dark hair she kept pinned tight and hands that showed every hour of ranch work she'd ever done. She did not complain. She did not ask for much. She kept the fences mended, the horses fed, and the books balanced in a ledger she reviewed by lamplight each evening, though the numbers grew harder to look at each month. Red Mesa was a modest town. A feed store, a post office, a dry goods counter, a livery, and the cattleman's bank, which was the most important building in town, whether anyone said so or not. Gideon Rusk kept an office above that bank. He was 45, always pressed and powdered, with a wide mustache and small, calculating eyes. He called himself a land developer. The settlers called him something worse in private. Rusk had spent the last 3 years quietly absorbing struggling homesteads across the mesa. He made offers that sounded reasonable until you read the fine print. He sent friendly men to explain the terms. If the friendly men didn't work, he sent other men, the kind who stood a little too close and spoke a little too low. Martha had received her first letter from the Rusk Land Syndicate 4 months after Daniel was buried. The letter that arrived on a Tuesday in September was not the first, but it was different from the others. The others had been formal, polite even. This one was typed on syndicate stationery and informed Martha, in plain language, that a review of the original Hale land grant had uncovered an irregularity in the deed filing, that the matter would require resolution within 30 days, that the syndicate was prepared to offer a fair settlement. In her interest, of course. Martha read it twice at the kitchen table. Then she folded it and set it beside the lamp. She sat a long time in the still air, listening to the wind press against the window glass. She knew what irregularity meant. It meant Gideon Rusk had decided he was done being patient. She rode into Red Mesa the next morning. The Territorial Land Office was a single-room addition bolted to the back of the post office building, run by a clerk named Odell, who wore bifocals on a chain and had the defeated look of a man who had seen too many of these conversations. Martha laid the letter on his counter and watched him read it. He set it down carefully. "Mrs. Hale," he said, "I have to be straight with you. When Rusk's people file a deed challenge, It goes to the county recorder in Prescott. That takes time and money neither of us has much of. Is the challenge legitimate? He hesitated long enough to answer the question without answering it. The original filing is sound as far as I can see. But if there's a competing document, a forged one, say, and it gets recorded first. He shook his head. She understood. She visited the bank next. The loan officer, a thin man named Pruitt, who smelled of pomade and anxiety, informed her that her existing loan could not be extended further, and that any legal defense she mounted would need to be self-funded. He said this while looking at his desk blotter. She walked back to her horse in the white morning heat and stood there a moment, hand on the saddle, looking at the street. 3 options, as she saw it. She could sell. Rusk would get the land for a fraction of its worth, and she would have enough to start somewhere smaller, somewhere diminished. That was surrender. She could fight the deed challenge herself, in the courts, without money, against men who had money and patience, and judges they'd already spoken to. That was a slower kind of surrender. Or she could do what her neighbor Hector Vargas had told her about 3 weeks ago, half joking at the fence line. The thing you did when the law was unavailable and the situation had teeth. You send for the Last Gunwoman. Hector had laughed when he said it. Martha hadn't. She'd asked him how. He'd gone quiet and said there was a way, but that she'd have to mean it, that the woman didn't come for half measures. Martha meant it. She composed the letter that evening by lamplight. She kept it short. She had heard that was preferred. She described the land, the threat, the syndicate, and what she could pay, which was honest and modest. She said she was not asking for rescue. She was asking for a fair fight. She rode the letter to the Red Mesa post office before sunrise, addressed it the way Hector had told her, to a relay point in Tucson that apparently reached the right ears. Then she went home and waited. She did not expect an answer, but she kept the porch lamp burning each night, just the same. The answer came not by post, but by hoofbeat. 12 days later, Martha was splitting fence posts in the early morning when she heard a single horse coming up the south trail. Unhurried, steady, the kind of ride that belongs to someone who answers to no timetable but their own. The rider wore a long trail coat, a low-brimmed hat, and rode a pale gray mare with quiet eyes. She stopped at the edge of the yard and looked at Martha the way a person looks when they're deciding whether the job is honest. Martha looked back and didn't flinch. The Last Gunwoman dismounted without ceremony. She was younger than Martha had expected. Mid-20s, lean and weathered, with a stillness about her that had nothing to do with rest. She wore 2 colts on a double rig, worn smooth with use. Her face was composed, unreadable at first glance, though there was something in her eyes, a measuring intelligence, patient and precise, that told you she was reading the yard, the house, the fences, and Martha herself all at once. "You sent the letter," she said. It was not a question. "I did," Martha said. "Show me the land." They spent the better part of that morning walking it together. Martha led her through the eastern pasture, the dry creek bed, the ridge line above the north quarter, and finally down into the shallow draw behind the barn where the ground softened and the grass grew a shade greener than everything around it. The Last Gunwoman crouched and pressed 2 fingers into the earth, lifted them, rubbed the moisture between her fingertips. "Your husband know about this?" she asked. He suspected. He never dug to confirm. "There's water here. Not much, but consistent. A spring feed, probably 8 feet down, maybe 10. Martha was quiet a moment. "I thought as much." "That's not all." The Last Gunwoman stood and turned to look at the ridge above. That wagon trace along your north fence line. It's the only grade in this section that can carry loaded freight without breaking an axle. Rusk knows it. The railroad survey from last year would have shown him. He doesn't want this land for cattle. What does he want it for? A freight corridor. Tie the spring to a way station. Tie the way station to the rail spur they're planning south of Red Mesa. This parcel becomes the hinge point of the whole route. She looked at Martha evenly. This land is worth 10 times what he's offered, maybe more. Martha stood in the dry morning heat and felt something settle in her chest. Not relief, not exactly. More like confirmation of something she had known without words. So the irregularity in the deed, she said. Forged. It's what he does. He has a man in Prescott, a recorder named Alice, who files the competing documents once the original owner is pressured enough to walk away or gets tied up long enough for the false record to become the matter of record. The gunwoman looked toward the house. Has anyone come out here yet, in person? Not yet. A letter, 2 weeks ago. They'll send riders soon. That's the next step. She walked back toward the barn at an easy pace. Tell me about the deed itself, the original. Where is it? In the house. Locked tin box under the floor. Good. Keep it there. She paused at the barn door. I'll need to see Rusk's full pattern before we move. I've crossed him before. Not here, but the method is the same. He runs 3 steps ahead of the law because he controls which direction the law looks. She met Martha's eyes. I'm not going to shoot our way out of this. Martha almost smiled. I didn't hire you for that. Most people do. I hired you because you know how men like Rusk work, and because when you show up, they have to think twice. The gunwoman was quiet a moment. Then she said, I'll stay through what's coming. After that, I ride. I know, Martha said. That's enough. They worked through the afternoon together, quietly and practically, the way 2 people work when the task is real and the time is short. The last gunwoman inspected the fence lines, the trail approaches, the sight lines from the porch and barn roof. She asked sharp questions. She wasted nothing, no motion, no word, no time. Martha answered everything honestly. By evening, a pot of coffee sat between them on the porch table. The desert cooled. The stars came out enormous and close, the way they do only in high desert country, and the ranch settled into a silence that felt, for the first time in months, like something that could be defended. The next 3 days were preparation and patience. The last gunwoman sent a single wire from the Red Mesa telegraph office. Martha didn't ask to whom, and spent the first evening writing in a small journal by lamplight. She did not share what she wrote, but Martha noticed she was drawing something. Lines, names, arrows, a map of connections rather than geography. Rusk's scheme depends on speed, the gunwoman explained the following morning over the cast iron stove. He pressures the landowner, files the fraudulent deed, and gets the original owner off the property before anyone can cross-reference the filing dates. The corruption works because it's faster than the honest process. So we slow him down, Martha said. Better. We reverse the advantage. She set the journal on the table and turned it so Martha could see. 3 things need to happen. The original deed gets filed with a certified witness affidavit, someone outside Rusk's reach, confirming the document's authenticity and the date of first possession. That takes the recorder option away from him. Second, the spring gets documented. A surveyor's assessment, on record, showing the water source and the freight grade. That changes the legal value of the parcel and makes a backroom sale harder to execute quietly. Third, she tapped a name at the bottom of the page. Alice Prescott. Alice has been filing for Rusk for 2 years. He's not loyal. He's paid. I know someone who has proof of 2 prior fraudulent filings Alice processed for the syndicate on land in Yavapai County. That proof goes to the territorial inspector and the Prescott courier simultaneously. Once Alice knows he's exposed, Rusk loses his mechanism in the county office. Martha studied the page. And Rusk himself? Rusk is careful. He never signs the fraud directly, but when the other pieces fall, he loses the recorder, loses the legal cover, and loses the land play entirely. He can be loud about it, but he can't be criminal about it without exposing everything he's built. The gunwoman closed the journal. His power depends on no one connecting the pattern. We connect it. Publicly. It was elegant, Martha thought, and it required no one to get hurt. The surveyor, Martha said. Can you get one out here by the end of the week? He'll arrive Thursday. Old fellow named Greer, out of Flagstaff. He's worked against Rusk before. He'll know what he's looking at. Greer arrived Thursday as promised. Stout, gray-bearded, and possessed of the kind of professional irritability that comes from a lifetime of watching honest work get undermined. He spent 4 hours on the property, confirmed the spring at 9 feet with a test rod, measured the freight grade along the north fence to within a half degree, and produced a preliminary survey document before sunset. This land is worth keeping, he told Martha flatly as he packed his instruments. He did not address the gunwoman directly, but he gave her a small nod as he mounted to leave, the kind of nod that passed between people who had worked the same side of a long fight. The certified affidavit went out Friday with the Morning Post, signed by Greer and witnessed by the Red Mesa postmaster, a quiet, principled woman named June Aldridge, who read every word before she set her name to it and said only, "About time someone pushed back." By Friday evening, the wire had been answered. The proof on Alice was in transit from a contact in Yavapai County. It would reach the territorial inspector's office and the newspaper editor in Prescott by Monday morning. Saturday passed slowly. The gunwoman cleaned her Colts on the porch rail in the late afternoon, not with the urgency of preparation, but with the routine care of someone who maintains their tools the way a carpenter maintains a good plane, out of respect for the work. Martha watched from the kitchen window and thought about the word irreversible, about the moment a thing tips past the point where it can be taken back. The riders came Sunday at dusk. There were 3 of them. They came up the South Trail the same way trouble always came, slow and certain, counting on the sight of them being enough. They were Rusk's men, recognizable by the syndicate brand on their horses' flanks. They crested the rise above the yard and reined in. Martha stood on the porch steps. The last gunwoman stood to her left, hands loose at her sides, the last light of the desert evening falling across her like something out of a story people would tell for years afterward. One of the riders said something to the other. Neither moved forward. The standoff had begun. The lead rider was a broad man in a good hat named Cutter. Martha had seen him in Red Mesa once, standing outside Rusk's bank office like a fixture. He carried himself with the practiced ease of someone who had done this kind of work before and expected it to follow the usual script. He looked at Martha. Then his eyes moved to the woman standing beside her. Something changed in his face. A small shift, a tightening, a recalculation. He knew who he was looking at. They all did. The last gunwoman had a reputation that traveled faster than any post rider, built from 6 years of appearances at exactly the wrong moment for men like Cutter. He recovered quickly. Professional habit. "Mrs. Hale," he called out from the saddle. "Mr. Rusk sends his regards. He asked us to remind you that the deadline on the deed matter is this coming Wednesday. He's hoping you'll be reasonable." "I've been reasonable for 4 months," Martha said. "I'm done with it." Cutter's eyes moved to the gunwoman again, held there a moment, then back to Martha. "That's a complicated position, ma'am. Mr. Rusk is a patient man, but patience has a bottom." "So does fraud," the last gunwoman said. Her voice was level and unhurried. It carried across the yard like a stone dropping into still water. Cutter went still. "I don't know what you think you—" Alice filed 2 fraudulent competing deeds for Rusk in Yavapai County in the last 18 months, she said. One against the Briar Creek claim, one against a widow named Sorensen north of Prescott. Both are documented. Both are in the hands of the territorial inspector as of this morning. She tilted her head slightly. The same documents went to the Prescott Courier. They print Tuesdays. The second rider shifted in his saddle. The third had gone very still. Cutter stared at her. She watched him work through it, the math, the exposure, the question of what he'd been sent to do versus what he was now standing in. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice had lost a layer. "You could ride back and tell Rusk that," she said. "Give him the night to think it over. Or you could step down and we could discuss the terms of a clean exit for you and your associates, not for Rusk." There was a long silence. The desert wind pushed dust across the yard. One of the horses shifted and blew. "What terms?" Cutter said finally. "You 3 are hired men. You followed orders. That's the whole of it, as far as I'm concerned. And as far as the inspector is concerned, if you cooperate." She let that settle. "The land fraud case goes forward regardless. What's optional is who else gets named in it." Cutter looked at the other 2. The second rider, younger, gave a short shake of his head. Not refusal, Martha thought, but something closer to relief. The third man was already looking at the trail back toward town. Cutter turned back. He took his time. But when he finally spoke, the confidence was gone from his voice, replaced with something flat and practical. "We'll relay the message to Rusk," he said. "That's wise," Martha said. They turned their horses. No bluster, no final word. Just the 3 of them riding back down the south trail the way they had come, their pace a little less certain than the ride in, the evening closing around them as the last light left the mesa. Martha let out a slow breath. The last gunwoman hadn't moved. The relief lasted until morning. Martha woke before dawn to the sound of a horse in the yard and found a folded note tucked under the porch door. No signature, but the handwriting was tight and deliberate, and she recognized the syndicate paper stock. "You have made a serious mistake. The deed matter will be settled in Prescott, not on that porch. Be prepared to vacate by end of month. Gr." She brought the note inside and read it twice at the table. She was not surprised. She had not expected Rusk to fold the night before. Men like Rusk did not fold to a front porch conversation. They regrouped. The gunwoman read the note in silence and set it down. "He's moving to Prescott," she said. "He'll try to get the competing deed filed before the inspector acts on the Yavapai documents. It'll be close." "How close?" "The inspector opens his office Monday. The courier prints Tuesday. Rusk has men who can move fast." She was quiet a moment. "Someone needs to be in Prescott by end of day today." Martha looked at her. "You? I'd draw the wrong kind of attention walking into a government office. But you wouldn't." She met her eyes. "You're the landowner. You're the named party. Your presence, your original deed, your surveyor's documentation. That's the cleanest argument there is. I've never been to Prescott. It's 4 hours by the morning stage. There's one leaving Red Mesa at 6. Martha looked at the window. Gray dawn light. Maybe 40 minutes until 6. And while I'm gone? I'll be here, the gunwoman said simply. Martha packed what she needed in 15 minutes. The deed in its tin box, Greer's survey document, the syndicate letters, and a clean written account of the deed challenge and the timeline, which the gunwoman had helped her compose over the previous 2 evenings in precise, evidential language. She dressed well. It mattered, walking into a government office as a woman asking to be heard. She knew that without being told. At the door, she paused. If Rusk sends more men while I'm gone, I'll manage, the gunwoman said. I know you will. That's not what I was going to say. A pause. Thank you, Martha said, for coming when I asked, for the way you work. She held the woman's gaze. The way you think? The gunwoman was still for a moment. Something moved across her face, briefly, like cloud shadow across open ground. Ride safe, she said. Martha caught the 6 o'clock stage out of Red Mesa. In Prescott, she walked into the territorial inspector's office at 10:30 and laid the original Hale deed, Greer's certified survey, and the documented syndicate correspondence on the desk of a man named Inspector Voss, a trim, serious official from Ohio who had been appointed specifically to address the land fraud complaints accumulating across the territory. He read everything. He read it twice. Then he called in his clerk and asked him to pull the Yavapai files. By noon, the inspector had confirmed the Alice connection across 3 separate cases. By early afternoon, Alice himself, reached by wire, had agreed to full cooperation in exchange for reduced liability. He had, it turned out, kept records. Careful, self-protective records of every fraudulent filing he'd processed, every payment, every instruction. Gideon Rusk's name was on all of them. Martha sat in the hallway outside the inspector's office and held her hands still in her lap and thought of Daniel, who had believed in the land, who had been right about it in every way that mattered. The wire arrived in Red Mesa late Monday afternoon. Martha was still in Prescott, but back at the ranch, the message came through the telegraph office, and June Aldridge brought it out personally. Rusk had filed a motion in the county court to temporarily enjoin the territorial inspection, citing procedural irregularities. A sympathetic judge, one of Rusk's, had granted a 48-hour stay. The Last Gunwoman read the wire on the porch. 48 hours. Enough time for Rusk to move money, move documents, move people. She stood in the long afternoon shadow of the ranch house and thought. Then she walked to her horse and began to saddle up. In the Prescott hotel room that night, Martha sat by the window and let the fear come. She had done everything right. Every step had been careful and honest and well documented. She had found the right person, made the right arguments, placed the right evidence in the right hands. And Rusk had still found a lever. He always found a lever. That was what money and patience bought you. The ability to keep reaching for levers even as the walls closed in. She thought about the ranch in the dark, the porch in the evening, the spring 9 feet down in the eastern draw, the water that had waited there quietly all those years while the surface dried and cracked and fooled everyone who looked too quickly. She thought about Daniel, who had walked that land for 11 years and loved it without ever knowing what it held. The West doesn't care who you are, only what you're willing to stand for. She had stood. She had done everything she could do. It was not enough to feel sorry for herself. There was one more thing. She went to the small writing desk, lit the lamp, and wrote 2 letters. One to Inspector Voss, one to the editor of the Prescott Courier. She signed them both with her full name and sent them with the night clerk before she slept. The Last Gunwoman rode into Prescott before dawn. She had not been summoned. She had come because the stay meant someone had gotten to a judge, and someone getting to a judge left a trail, and she knew how to read those trails. She found Martha at the hotel at first light. She had a name, a county court clerk who had been present when Rusk's attorney filed the injunction motion. The clerk had not been comfortable with what he'd witnessed. He was, it turned out, willing to say so. The clerk's name was Harold Webb, 30 years in county court, the last 4 of them watching Gideon Rusk's attorney walk through the filing office with paperwork that never seemed to follow normal procedure. He had noted every irregularity in a private record he kept in a cigar box in his desk. He had not known what to do with it. He had not had anyone to tell. The Last Gunwoman had a way of finding those people. She brought him to Inspector Voss's office at 8 in the morning, with Martha beside her and the cigar box under Webb's arm. Voss read the clerk's records the way a doctor reads a patient's history. Carefully, quietly, with growing certainty. The 48-hour stay was challenged before noon on the grounds of improper judicial influence. A second judge, brought in from Maricopa County, reviewed the record and lifted it by midday. The investigation was reinstated. Tuesday morning, the Prescott Courier ran the story on the front page. The editor, a deliberate man named Horace Finch, who had been cautious about Rusk for years, had received Martha's letter, confirmed its claims against the inspector's record, and published a detailed account of the syndicate's land fraud operation. The false deeds, the intimidation letters, the recorder Alice, the 3 counties affected, the names. Rusk's name appeared in the second paragraph and did not leave. Martha read the paper at the hotel breakfast table, with her coffee going cold beside her. She read it carefully, all the way through, the way you read something you want to be certain is real. The Last Gunwoman sat across from her, not reading, watching the street through the window with her usual stillness. "It's done," Martha said. "The newspaper part," the gunwoman said. "The legal part takes longer. Months, maybe. But the deed challenge is finished. Alice won't file anything. The recorder's office will flag anything Rusk's name touches going forward. He'll be occupied." She paused. "He won't come after the ranch again. Too expensive. Too visible. He might find another way. He might." She looked at Martha. "But you'll be watching for it now, and you know how his scheme works. That's worth more than a court ruling." Martha looked at the paper again. Her land, her deed, her spring. "The freight corridor," she said. "Once the survey is public, the railroad will come looking. Probably within the year. I'll need legal help, contracts, someone who knows land rights. Voss can point you to the right attorney. There are a few honest ones in the territory." The corners of the gunwoman's mouth moved, barely. "You'd be surprised." Martha folded the paper. She thought about riding home, about the porch in the late morning light, the horses in the pen, the dry grass that now held a different meaning than it had 3 weeks ago. She thought about what came next. Not survival, but something more forward-looking than that. Building, extending. She thought about a way station. Honest work, fair pay. The land doing what it had always been capable of. They rode back together as far as the Red Mesa cutoff, 4 hours on horseback through canyon country, the sky a hard bright blue above the red rock walls. They did not talk much, the comfortable quiet of people who have worked alongside each other and earned it. At the cutoff, the gunwoman reined in her pale gray mare. Martha stopped beside her. "Where do you go from here?" Martha asked. The gunwoman looked west, toward the long mesa line. "I've heard there's trouble up in the Mogollon country, a mining outfit running off small claims." Martha nodded. "Of course there was. There was always somewhere." "Will you be all right?" the gunwoman asked. "I will," Martha said. And she meant it. Not bravado, but the plain kind of certainty that comes from having stood in the hard place and come through it intact. The gunwoman looked at her a moment. Then she said, "Your husband was right about the land." Martha felt that land somewhere deep and quiet. She did not trust herself to speak immediately. When she did, she kept it simple. "I know," she said. "I always knew." The last gunwoman touched the brim of her hat. Then she reined the gray mare west and rode, unhurried, steady, the long trail coat moving in the wind off the mesa, growing smaller and smaller against the enormous sky until she was just a dark point in the distance, and then nothing at all. Martha watched until she was gone. Then she turned her horse toward home. Red Mesa heard the news by Wednesday. The syndicate letters stopped coming. Cutter and the two riders were not seen in town again. Gideon Rusk kept his office above the bank for another 2 months before quietly relocating to Phoenix, where, by all accounts, he found the legal environment less accommodating than he had hoped. The spring on the Hale property was properly developed that autumn. The freight route was confirmed by the railroad survey the following spring. The way station Martha built at the north fence line was modest and well made, and the teamsters who stopped there said it was one of the best run operations on the southern route. She kept the ranch. She kept it for years. They still talked about her in Red Mesa in the years that followed. The woman who had come out of nowhere and stood in a widow's yard at dusk with the last of the frontier light on her face and made 3 hard men turn their horses around. No one knew her name. Some said she'd been seen up in the Mogollon country. Some said farther north. Some said she was already a legend, and legends don't stay in one place. Martha Hale never said much about it when people asked, only that she had been afraid and had asked for help, and help had come. That was the whole of it. That was enough.